In our study of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, he has so far covered two important themes that the Kena has pointed us towards. The first is the creative power that is Brahman, that which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed. Know that to be the Brahman. And we have seen that behind even the power of human speech and all power of expression in the human consciousness, there is this essential, primary creative power of the Brahman which presides, and of which the human speech and human powers of expression and creation are only distant, reflected representations. The second idea that the Kena leads us to now, which we have completed our study of, that which thinks not by the mind, that by which the mind is thought. Know that to be Brahman. And here Sri Aurobindo led us through to the recognition of a power greater than the human mind, which completes all that the human mind is struggling to achieve, and of which the human mind is only a reflected, distorted, and even opposite form. And all attempt in the human mind to realize some greater completeness, some greater unity, some sense of possession of the world are completed in and naturally available in this higher mind of our mind, that is supermind. And it is for this reason that the human mind's efforts can succeed only in proportion as this mental consciousness in which we live is transmuted into the higher supramental consciousness, which is mind of our mind. And now we enter the third important idea, which the Upanishad has been pointing us to. And this is expressed in verse 6. That which sees not with the eye, that by which one sees the eyes seeing. Know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. And verse 7, that which hears not with the ear, that by which the ear's hearing is heard. Know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here. This brings us to the theme of Brahman as eye of our eye and ear of our ear. And Sri Aurobindo now enters a fascinating discussion on what this means. Very superficially, if we had to read these two verses, we would say that in our physical sight, there is an act of seeing, which is not the process of the physical sight. That act of seeing is not a material process. It is not even a material action. Perhaps we can say it is an essential action in the mind. Mind turns to become aware as it looks through the eyes, turns to become aware as it listens through the ear's hearing, and there is a registration of what the hearing means, of what the eye sees. And it is to that that the Upanishad is pointing. And we would be correct in understanding it this way, but only partially. What we have recognized is that there's something happening behind our seeing, behind our hearing, a part of which we are conscious, but there's something much more deep which we are not conscious of. Even when we try to become aware, in what part of our consciousness do we actually experience the sight? You look at a beautiful flower. you appreciate it. But if you try to analyze your own experience of sight, where in your consciousness are you registering the sight of the flower? In what part is the sight experienced as something beautiful? In what is the essence of that sense of enjoyment of that beauty? And when we try to introspect, we come to something very essential, and we discover we are not fully conscious of this. We're aware that there is this center which sees, which senses, which experiences, but it feels as if there's something beyond, something behind, of which this is just the first opening, and we are unable to go deeper. We can, by a continued pressure of consciousness, of concentration, we can actually begin to go deeper into this. And if we were to take it to its culmination, we would come to that which is eye of our eye, and hearing of our hearing, ear of our ear. And it is towards this that the Kena is pointing us to. In his Sri Aurobindo's analysis, you will find not explains to us step by step what exactly is happening inside when we see, when we hear. He discusses the layers through which the experience of sight or touch or sense, any of the senses, have to pass through before we register it. And then in our registration, we discover there are deep processes of which we are not fully conscious. They are super conscious or behind the veil, which then he maps out for us, which make for the actual act of seeing and recognition in sight. And all of this makes for a fascinating discussion, but also it shows us how poor modern psychology is, and how much deeper and richer the Vedic psychology is, even in matters which seem to be primarily sensory material in us. So it's a fascinating chapter, and with many practical applications. In becoming conscious of these layers and their processes, we will find we can actually begin to modify how we register through our senses and bring into our sensory experience of the world a deeper perception. So we begin this chapter 8. Sri Aurobindo writes, "The Upanishad is not satisfied with the definition of the Brahman consciousness as mind of our mind, mind of the mind, just as it has described it as speech of the speech. So also it describes it as eye of the eye, ear of the ear," capital I, capital ear, to indicate that it is not another physical ear within the physical ear, but something deeper, more essential, non-material even. Not only is it an absolute cognition behind the play of expression, but also an absolute sense behind the action of the senses. So it here represents to Brahman consciousness. It is an absolute cognition behind the play of expression. So you will recall the discussions earlier that behind all of our material experiences in the world, in their relativities, behind each of them there is something which tends towards an absolute. And there is a height, an extreme, an essence in which we can say we reach the absolute of each of these things, each of these experiences, each of these values, each of these powers of consciousness. There is an absolute going all the way deep within. And so he says, the power of mind to know, to cognize, has behind it the Brahman, power of Brahman as mind of our mind. In the same way, behind our senses and their actions, there is an absolute sense, which is in the Brahman consciousness. And so he puts absolute sense with a capital S. Every part of our being finds its fulfillment in that which is beyond its present forms of functioning and not in those forms themselves. So there are two important ideas here. That Brahman consciousness, beyond the present forms of functioning of these outer machinery of our senses, of our mind, of our speech. But in saying beyond its present form of functioning, Sri Aurobindo is suggesting that there can be a higher form of functioning which aligns to this consciousness which is behind. Right now, that is beyond the present forms of functioning. But these forms of functioning, if we look back over the last few billion years, we see these forms of functioning have been evolving. The power of sight has been evolving. The power of speech has been evolving. Our power of thinking has been evolving. And if we are to continue this process and project in which direction it goes, we find inevitably all of these powers are tending towards their own greater possibilities, towards their own absolute. And so we can conceive of a time, maybe in a few billion years, that the mind itself may grow so much in its possibility that it becomes one with the higher power of cognition, which is natural to the Brahman consciousness. And our senses also grow into that. But in between, it is possible for us, instead of waiting a few billion years, to speed up this process and train the mind to become a conscious instrument of this higher power of cognition. And this was dwelt upon a little in the previous chapter. But the same can happen with the senses. Today we see through our five senses operating through a very limited, narrow band of capacity. But behind that, the thing which sees, the thing which hears, being an absolute consciousness, can experience the full range and the full possibility of a complete consciousness. And that is the direction in which our own sight and hearing are evolving towards. So beyond its present form of functioning, every part of our being finds its fulfillment. So not only this is true for the mind and for the senses, but all other functions, all our capacities. In fact, later on in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo even asks us to conceive of a possibility where mind is primary. And then he describes what the experience of the world will be like if mind was the fundamental substance. And we will see there a hint at what is possible in a supramentalized life and what the supramental consciousness, fully revealed, will be able to do even with the substance of matter. So this is the first hint that our present forms of functioning are limited, but that's not the end of the story. They are continuing to evolve. The second idea in this sentence is that every part of being finds its fulfillment in that which is beyond and not in those forms themselves. And therefore, in the current form, we will never find fulfillment. It is only by tapping the consciousness behind in which the full power is expressed, is inherent, that we can find fulfillment while still being in the current form and functioning. But when we find that fulfillment in that deeper consciousness, we can infuse it into the current form of functioning and change the current form. And such would be the process of what Sri Aurobindo has described as a transformation. So all of these ideas are implied in a very simple formulation. But now the focus is on the senses. And here Sri Aurobindo shows us first in what way our current understanding of the senses and their working is limited. And then bit by bit, he frees us from this and shows us the deeper truth of what's happening through our five senses and their operations. So this conception of the all-governing supreme consciousness does not fall in with our ordinary theories about sense and mind and the Brahman. What are the ordinary theories? We know of sense only as an action of the organs through which embodied mind communicates with external matter. And these sense organs have been separately developed in the course of evolution. The senses, therefore, are not fundamental things, but only subordinate conveniences and temporary physical functionings of the embodied mind. This is our conventional idea of the senses and the mind. So what do we understand? And this is our experience, that all senses need organs. If you damage the eyes, you cannot see. If the ears are blocked, you cannot hear. So the senses are operations taking place primarily through the organs. And yet, there is a mind which is using these organs. So for example, my ear is working perfectly well, but when I am reading something intensely, say I'm reading a novel and I'm fully engrossed in the story, I'm completely unaware of the sounds which are passing into my ears. So who is actually hearing? It is the mind. So there is an organ, physical entirely, and then there is the mind which is embodied, the mind which is fixed in the body, which feels itself a product of the body, which, because it is embedded in the body, feels the senses also through the body, feels itself bound to the working of the biology and the organs of the senses. So if you inject an anesthetic into my arm, my hand grows numb. And my mind says, I don't feel my hand anymore. Perhaps I don't even know if my hand is there. If it's cut or not, I wouldn't know. It needs the organs, but it is what registers what's happening through the organs. And these sense organs have developed separately in the course of evolution. Each of the senses has developed differently. So for example, we see in dogs, the sense of smell has developed so much more. It seems to be highly developed in human babies, but we lose it very quickly. On the other hand, when people are born blind, because they pay much more attention through the other senses, their sense of hearing is more acute than those of us who rely more on our sight. So although there are evolutionary developments, specializations of each of these senses, we have capacities which are not fully developed, although the potential is there even in our biology. And so there's a dependence on the development of the organs, and each of the five senses is separately developed through separate organs. Even when you study nature, you find several different kinds of eyes. In the fly, for example, there is what is called a composite eye. It's not one lens, but many dozens of lenses through which it sees simultaneously. There are other creatures which have even more unusual forms of seeing. Bats, for example, see through sound waves and so on. So, from all this, it seems the senses are not fundamental things, but only subordinate conveniences and temporary physical functionings of the embodied mind. So the mind is what is seeing through the physical senses, and it needs those physical senses as a base of support, subordinate and temporary. And this is our conventional idea of mind and senses. On the other side is our idea of Brahman. So even places before us, what is this conventional idea of Brahman that we have? Brahman, on the other hand, we conceive of by the elimination of all that is not fundamental, by the elimination even of the mind itself. So the most easy way to recognize Brahman in essentiality is to say, all this which you see, name and form, is not Brahman. Even your mind which is thinking is not Brahman. You have to eliminate all this to get to something so essential that your mind cannot conceive of it anymore. And then only you have Brahman. It is a sort of positive zero, an X or unknowable, which corresponds to no possible equation of physical or psychological quantities. So anything which is physical or psychological is not Brahman. Brahman is something essential. So when you get to that kind of an essentiality, no form, and therefore it's like a zero, but it is positive. It is not empty. It is something which fills, but which is formless, indescribable, unknowable X. Now, Sri Aurobindo does not comment on how true this is or not, because it has already been discussed. He simply says, in essence, this may or may not be true. Meaning, you can look at it this way and say, yes, that is true, but it's not the whole story. There is much more. But we have now to think not of the unknowable, but of its highest manifestation in consciousness. And this we have described as the outlook of the absolute on the relative, and as that which is the cause and governing power of all that we and the universe are. So at this point he is not getting into a detailed discussion of what is or is not Brahman, whatever our current conception. But he says our current focus is not the unknowable, but of the highest manifestation of the unknowable in consciousness. So the part where the unknowable turns to the knowable, which in a previous chapter he described as the outlook of the absolute on the relative. So when the divine consciousness, in its most essential, in its absolute, in its formless, in its unknowable station, turns to manifest, turns to relativity, turns to form and knowability, it's at that point, in transition, there is something which is on the borderline, which is both knowable and yet transcending. It is that which is for us the reference. It is to this that the Kena Upanishad is pointing. And this, he says, is the cause and governing power of all that we and the universe are. Because it is from here that the whole universe bursts out. It is this which formulates, gives form to, and organizes the whole universe and of course us. There, in that governing cause, there must be something essential and supreme, of which all our fundamental functionings are a rendering in the terms of embodied consciousness. So if you think of it this way, from that essential consciousness moving to manifest, when it has taken the form of the universe or of us, everything within us, at whatever essential level, essential powers, essential functions, must have something corresponding in that consciousness, because it has emerged from there. Because that has formed into this essential functioning. And so our functioning, fundamental functioning here, it has formed into fundamental functioning in us. There is the essential, here is a fundamental functioning in us. Here it is rendered in the form of embodied consciousness. So again we will take an analogy, which we used earlier also, of a computer programmer. You are about to create something on the computer. Or you can conceive of yourself as somebody who is writing a play or directing theater or making a cinema, any such activity of creation. Notice that in whatever you create, there is a part of yourself. You cannot create something which is not already in you in some essential way. So in the cinema, you create a scene where such and such a situation happens, there is a conflict, there is an outcome. But if there was not that capacity already within you in some degree, you could not conceive of it. Or if you push too far and you say somebody develops the power to fly, and that is not something which I think I have, so we put it in the domain of fiction, or if it goes too far, fantasy or science fiction. But still I can conceive of that idea of flying because already something within me has essentially in my mind the power to fly. In my mind I can float, fly over things, visualize things. Even a part of my mind can disengage in daydream and wander around as if floating and flying. And so because that capacity is there in essence, in the consciousness, not in the body, I am able to articulate that, conceive of it and give it expression in my story to a degree that perhaps I could not in my own body, but which already exists in my mind. So the idea is anything which is formed, manifested, is already held in essence in the consciousness from which the formulation takes place. And so there, in that governing cause, there must be something essential and supreme, of which all our fundamental functionings here are a rendering. But when it's rendered here, it is in terms of embodied consciousness. So when I do my play, I have to set it within the context of the frame of the stage. When I make a cinema, I have to fit it within the angle of the lens. I cannot show you a 360-degree picture. I have to limit it to whatever 30 degrees of the angle that the lens permits me to see. And so when that consciousness, however free it may be, has to render it here, it has to render it in terms of our embodied consciousness and its limitations, its incapacities, its finiteness, and so on. But still, there is the essential and supreme something of which this is a representation. This includes everything in the human experience, every part of our being which finds its absolute in that consciousness. So this being our current focus, now we have brought our understanding of the Brahman, and we are taking the current understanding of the senses, and Sri Aurobindo will join the two. Sense, however, is not or does not appear to be fundamental. It is only an instrumentation of mind using the nervous system. It is not even a pure mental functioning, but depends so much upon the currents of the life force, upon its electric energy vibrating up and down the nerves, that in the Upanishads the senses are called pranas, powers or functionings of the life force. And so we are looking at what's actually happening in the senses. Firstly, it appears that they are not fundamental. They are instruments of the mind using the nervous system. So between the mind and the sense organ, there is the whole nervous system linking the two. When you touch a hot stove, there is a sensation taking place in the fingertip, and then there's a whole transmission going through the arm all the way to the brain. The mind registers the sensation of heat, of danger, and then sends a signal back to pull the finger back. We can measure how long this process takes for the signal to go back and forth. If the heat is too great, the biology itself takes an intermediate action at a level before it reaches the brain. Before it reaches the conscious embodied mind, there is a subliminal or even subconscious embodied mind which is already taking urgent action. It burns so much, my hand moves back even before I am conscious of the sensation of heat. My hand moves back and then the sensation of pain hits. So there are layers already in the consciousness of which we are not fully aware. All of this is passing through the nervous system. If in surgery you cut the nerves which link the finger to the brain, then the finger would remain touching the hot stove. They would get burnt, and you wouldn't even know it. This happens, for example, when our hands are so cold that they seem almost frozen. They're numb. And at that point, they can get hit, they can get injured, and you feel no sensation. You don't know. Even the reflexes have been shut down. Because all that is operating through the nervous system. So he says it is not even a pure mental functioning, but depends on this nervous system. And depends on it so much, upon the currents of life force, that the Upanishads call it the pranas. The senses are called as pranas because they are primarily nervous functioning. So here Sri Aurobindo is describing also what's happening in the nerves. And it's not just modern science, it is the description also of the Vedic psychology, that the currents of life force, capital L, prana, but in their multiplicity of currents. So it is not even prana in its essential energy, but energy already moving to specialized functions. And there, as it passes in the nervous system, it is electric energy vibrating up and down the nerves. Now, in the same nervous system, there is a signal going outward and then inward. So, down and up, both ways, there are communications happening. In modern studies of the nervous system, there is even a recognition that there are two sets of nerves. One set specializing in signals which are receiving from outside, from the periphery, and another set specializing in sending signals to control the muscles and even to reach all the way to the point where the sensation is to be received. So there is an energy going out and then there is an energy coming in, electrical. But electrical energy is the most physical, dense representation of pranic energy. Now all of this is very important because you will see later, in this functioning of life energies, there is a representation of what's happening in the mind consciousness. We will see later in the chapter, he describes how in the mind there is a capacity of the mind to reach out, to touch, and then to bring in and to draw in, to grasp, and then to make sense of it. And this is actually reflected in the nervous system. First in the life energies and then in the nervous system operations. So these are powers or functionings of the life force. So senses appear to be primarily that. And then he says, it is true that mind turns these nervous impressions, when communicated to it, into mental values. But the sense action itself seems to be rather nervous than mental. So consider when the sensation comes through all the way to the brain, there's a registration, and then the mind turns it into a value saying, this is hot, this is dangerous, or this is comfortable, or this is uncomfortable, whatever form it takes. And that's only as if overlaid on top of something else which is more essential in the nerves. In any case, there would, at first sight, appear to be no warrant in reason for attributing a sense of the sense to that which is not embodied, to a supramental consciousness which has no need of any such instrumentation. So he says, at first it appears. If there's a consciousness which is not bound to body, which doesn't need body to function, then why does it need senses? And senses would not belong to it. So it seems. And so it seems because for us, the only experience of sense is through the body's embodied sensations. But if you pause a little and think about it, closing your eyes in your mind's daydream, you can experience things also. You can visualize things, see things in images, have conversations, even have sensations, but they are not exactly physical sensations. Are they real at all? At the moment, at least, we will recognize that they are there. How real, how material is not the point. Mind can see and experience, at least visually, the senses in its own domain, separate from the body. And so Sri Aurobindo is going to lead us bit by bit to a much deeper understanding. And then we will see the primacy of the mind in senses. In fact, this first view where it seems as if life force and biology have primacy will suddenly be turned around, and we will realize there's something much more, and it's seated in the mind. So the next paragraph, Sri Aurobindo writes, but this is not the last word about sense. This is only its outward appearance, behind which we must penetrate. What, not in its functioning but in its essence, is the thing we call sense. So now we start by a deeper introspective process. This is what we have seen biologically. It's good. But when we experience a sense, what is it that we mean when we say, I sense something, or I see something, or I hear something? In its functioning, if we analyze that thoroughly, we see that it is the contact of the mind with an eidolon of matter. Whether that eidolon be a vibration of sound, a light image of form, a volley of earth particles giving the sense of odor, an impression of rasa or sap that gives the sense of taste, or that direct sense of disturbance of our nervous being, which we call touch. So if we observe internally, subjectively, when we say, I have a sensation of something, it is, he says, contact of the mind with an eidolon of matter. So, first, what is this material input coming in, which is an eidolon which mind sees? Eidolon, Sri Aurobindo is using a Greek word because it has a very specific sense. In Greek, the eidolon is idol or image, often of God, of gods. But the idol is not the God. It is a representation. Or even there is a suggestion in the usage of the word in Greek, a false God and a false representation. And then by extension, it acquires the character in modern English language usage to mean a phantom, a ghost, or an apparition which has no reality. So when he uses the word eidolon, you will find this sense in the background. Something is represented which is false, unreal, vague, like a phantom. But still it represents something. But it is not the thing itself. It is almost like a fakery of the thing. So he gives now a description of all five senses. In all five, there is an eidolon of something which is material. So first he says, be it the vibration of sound. So somebody speaks, somebody strikes a drum, there's a loud sound. But what is it that comes to your ear? It is a vibration in the air. Is it the drum? Is it the striking of the drum? Is it the person who's striking the drum? Is it his intention? The same way when he speaks, what's coming is the vibration in the air, but not the speech itself or the mind or the formulation which is intended in the speech. None of that is there. So what's coming is a vibration of air. If that vibration could be replicated without the person being there, you wouldn't know the difference. This is in fact what happens when we listen to a recording. And when the recording is sufficiently good in quality, you cannot know if the person is actually there or it's a recording. Consider that the earliest records were made on wax. You have a vibrating disc which catches the air vibration, a sharp needle at the back, and a roll of wax, soft wax, which is turning. And so the sharp vibration, the vibration of the sharp needle cuts a jiggle in the wax, and as it's moving, it leaves a trail of shaking passage. Later, the wax hardens, and the same needle is stuck inside the groove, and you turn the wax roll, and as the needle is shaken, it shakes the disc to which it is attached, and you hear the sound again. Of course, not very high quality. But what you hold in the hand afterwards is the recording, is a chunk of wax with some groove cut into it. Is that sound? Not at all. When you recreate it, it's not the person nor his intention which comes to the ear. So finally what comes to the ear is only this vibration. It's not the thing itself, and therefore eidolon. And this is what mind is registering. So it is contact of mind with an eidolon of matter. Never the matter itself directly. Next he gives the example of sight. A light image of form. So I look at the flower which is on the tree and I say, I'm seeing flower. No, I'm not seeing flower. What I'm actually seeing is the light which has come through the air, and it could have got distorted any amount. For example, light coming from a distant galaxy might be passing near a black hole and getting distorted, getting amplified so it looks bigger or smaller or whatever. It comes to me, passes through the lens in my eyes and creates an image inside, upside down. So very often when children are shown this in their textbooks, that inside the eye the picture is actually upside down, they wonder, but then I don't see the world upside down, how is it? And so the popular explanation given by the teacher is that, well, the link from the eyeballs, the cord which takes it to the brain, that reverses it and it becomes straight again. No, that's not true. It doesn't have to bother to reverse, because the actual seeing is not in the physical space of upside down or straight. It is in mind space. And in mind space, upside down has no meaning. It registers it by habit. This is straight, and that's all. There's no meaning, there's no need for the nerve to straighten it around by a twist and so on. Or they say the brain processes it. There's no need to process. The concept of up and down is what mind defines it freely. And it places it in this way, and that's all you see. On the other hand, under hypnosis, you could play around. You could tell the person that from this point on, all red appears green, and all green appears red. And the person will look at the trees and see green flowers and red leaves. You can take the person out on the street and he will point to a green colored car and say that is red. Where is the actual seeing taking place? The image inside is still the same. The eidolon being projected to the mind is still this ghost image on the retina. But the mind is what is seeing, and it is translating and giving meaning to the eidolon. And the eidolon of the actual tree out there, the tree may be removed. I may have my 3D goggles, virtual reality device plugged in on my head, and I see a tree or a recording of a tree which is not there or which is created by the computer, and the mind is fully immersed, thinking it is real. So always there is an eidolon of matter which the mind is entering in contact with. Mind is seeing a ghost and giving to that seeing the value that it wants. Third, he gives the example of smell. A volley of earth particles giving the sense of odor. So observe what happens when you are smelling something. There are a whole bunch of particles which are touching the surface of the nose, receptors inside the nose, being absorbed. And today, with increasing understanding of how the sense of smell works, we find still that it is so complex, we are unable to explain it fully. There are literally thousands of different kinds of specialized smell receptors in the nose. And somehow out of this, as they say, the brain makes sense of it, but it's not the brain even. The brain is only transmitting. The mind takes it, and from that eidolon of thousands of specialized imprints, it draws some recognition. This is rose smell. This is sweet. This is tangy smell, or whatever form it takes. The same with the taste, an impression of a rasa or sap that gives the sense of taste. And it is only an impression. It is such a complex process, we do not fully understand it. In fact, in the tasting and even in the smelling, there are literally specialized registrations which we are unable to be conscious of. For example, the term used for the smell is pheromone. There are specialized chemicals, structures which we are unable to consciously register, but the moment the nose catches them and the mind registers them, there is instantly a shift in our mood, in our emotions, in our thinking. And the same happens with tastes. With the taste also, there are subtle operations which we are totally unconscious of. And so we find, for example, there is a taste enhancer. By itself, the thing has no taste. But when it is present, all other tastes get amplified. How this happens, we are still unable to explain. And it's not happening in the tongue, it's not happening in the nervous system linking to the brain, it's not even happening in the brain, it's happening in the mind which is receiving the eidolon which has been projected to it. And last, or that direct sense of disturbance of our nervous being which we call touch. And this is the most important of the 5 senses because it is the most direct. You are making physical contact. All other things you don't have a physical contact with. All the other things can be faked. But the physical touch is the most comforting. So you notice, for example, when you're not sure whether what you're seeing is true, the first thing you want to do is to try to touch it. And if you're able to make physical contact, there's a relief. It's real enough. Suppose suddenly a ghostly image appears. Is it really you? And I try to reach and touch. And if I can make the touch, yes, you have actually come. I didn't expect you to come. But the concreteness of the contact is what makes it the most close of all senses. And that's why he refers to it as that direct sense of, but what is it, the touch? Disturbance of our nervous being, which we call touch. So in the actual point of touch, there is only a disturbance in the nervous system, and there is an agitation which is transmitted in the life force through the nerves, and that disturbance is all that reaches the mind, and the mind gives to it this meaning, touch. So in all these cases, you see, it is the contact of the mind with an eidolon of matter. You are never in direct contact with the matter itself. Even when you touch, your touch experience is not in contact with the matter. There is a translation through, and there is an eidolon with which you are in contact. Mind only meets eidolon, never matter. Cannot meet matter. So he says, no doubt, the contact of matter with matter is the original cause of these sensations. So some material is touching another material. Light is touching my retina. Finger is touching the eyes. The air is touching my nose. The liquid is on my tongue, and so on. Matter with matter contact is triggering the process, but the sight experience in me is mind meeting eidolon. It is only the eidolon of matter. So matter touches matter, triggers something, but it is only the eidolon of matter which lasts. It is only the eidolon of matter, as for instance, the image of the form cast upon the eye, with which the mind is directly concerned. And this is the reason why virtual reality is possible. If you can project to the mind directly the eidolon of whatever physical thing you imagine, for the mind there is no difference. Very quickly the mind enters into the reality of it and you experience it as vividly. There are people, for example, who, because of some damage to the physical biology, are unable to see in 3 dimensions with their physical sight. And yet, when you put them in a virtual reality device, after a while the mind kicks in and begins to see in 3 dimensions. So it's as if you have bypassed a certain physical limitation and got to the mind directly, and the mind brings in its natural way of seeing. The image cast upon the eye, it's the mind meeting eidolon, whatever the physical cause. For the mind operates upon matter not directly, but through the life force. That is its instrument of communication. And the life force, being in us a nervous energy and not anything material, can seize on matter only through nervous impressions of form, through contactual images, as it were, which create corresponding values in the energy consciousness called in the Upanishads the prana. So here is the deeper understanding of the linking principle from mind to matter. Mind cannot operate upon matter directly, only through life force. Now, for life force has two gradations. There is the general energy, which is the energy you feel in your body. I feel fresh, I feel very energetic. And then there are specialized currents of that energy, as for example, the energy as it moves through the nervous system, the energy as it moves through the muscles, the energy which you might feel when you're walking or in certain specialized activities, where the energy is concentrated in one part but not in others. So, life force is its instrument of communication, and this life force can seize on matter only through nervous impressions of form, being in us a nervous energy and not anything material. So where's the life energy? You cannot separate it and hold it with tweezers. It's non-material. You can experience it. You can measure its effect on biology. So where life energy is strong, you find the healing process is faster, temperatures are higher, and so on. But you cannot actually measure the life force itself. We have, of course, developed tools which are bordering the material. There's something called Kirlian photography, which allows you to measure what they call the physical aura. And you can see a haze around the fingers, and the play of the life force through this device. You can see how the energy around the fingers changes according to your mood, according to your thoughts. And even it's possible to see, if you take a fresh leaf and cut out a piece, within the Kirlian photography, you will get the full picture of the entire leaf still. So the energy body of prana is still intact, even when the physical part has been cut off freshly. After a while, that energy which is not based in the material part, which has been cut, it begins to weaken and gradually withdraw until eventually the energy body matches the physical body. So you see here a dependence of the life force on the material biology, on what he has described as the nervous impressions of form. Because it is a nervous energy in us, it operates through the nerves, and so through the nerves, the form that it can get is all that it can hold, the impression. Through contactual images, as it were, which create corresponding values in the energy consciousness, called in the Upanishads the prana. So there has to be in the energy a point of contact. So let's look at the example of the sight. The light came on the retina. But what happens after that? The life force in the nerves has to translate this. The life force enters in contact with the light and turns it into an impression, as if the light force meets the light, embraces it, takes an imprint, takes a picture through contact, and takes it back. Now this description is very important, although he is using a vocabulary which is difficult to express in the English language. He's using this word, mental impression of form. He says contactual image, an image received through contact. If you observe the way this works, you see something, let's say in the distance, somebody is coming, cycling, You're not sure who is it. Is it this person or that? Is it the person that I know? And you notice what happens next. You put a huge concentration in your sight, as if you're putting more energy in the sight, concentrating on that form. And then suddenly it becomes clearer, and there's a recognition, ah yes, it is this person. Oh no, it's not that person. Whatever it is. The push of the energy actually involves an energy going into, through the nervous system, to the retina surface, in enhancing, intensifying the registration of the light. And in the mind, in enhancing the registration of the form. Similar thing happens when you listen. If you are listening to sounds, let's say in a room full of people, everybody is talking at the same time, it's a social occasion. Somebody is speaking to you, and the sound is blurred by all the other voices at the same time. You notice what you need to do? You make a strong concentration of attention as if to zoom in on this person's voice only. And all the other voices seem as if to fade away. They become less concrete. This becomes more intense. And you'll notice at that point, it's as if a part of your mind is pushing energy and enhancing this, narrowing and enhancing, intensifying this, and everything else not receiving energy dims as if. And observe these are very concrete experiences we all have. We're just doing it unconsciously without realizing what's really happening here. And this power can actually be developed consciously. And if you train it, you will find in an orchestra of 100 instruments, you can pick out one single instrument and follow that precisely, almost ignoring all the others. All the others get blurred behind, and just this one gets amplified and intensified. Similar thing can happen with smell or taste. So you eat a dish that somebody has prepared, which has a very rich taste. What did you put? There's something so special. How did you manage to get this taste? And then you notice your mind concentrates, the energy focuses, and tries to isolate that particular taste which you're not able to recognize, and all other tastes fade out. This gets amplified until suddenly it pops up with a memory. Ah, this is what you have put. And you catch it at that point. You have isolated one particular ingredient in the mix of all the tastes. Now, if you try to explain this purely by nervous processing, in the tongue, remember, there are so many specialized receptors, and each taste is touching a combination of receptors. In the nose, 1,000 specialized receptors, and each perfume is mixing across all these. How do you isolate a particular smell or a particular form? There's no way to do that. And yet, something is being able to do it, and therefore it is non-material. The whole processing is taking place at an energetic level, and it is the energy which concentrates to isolate this. And in the contact, it captures a contactual image, impression of form, as it were, which creates corresponding values in the energy consciousness of the prana. Mind takes these up and replies to them with corresponding mental values, mental impressions of form, so that the thing sensed comes to us after a triple process of translation. First, the material eidolon. Secondly, the nervous or energy image. Third, the image reproduced in stuff of mind. Now this is straight away going to hardcore artificial intelligence. How do you recognize an image? So on the material level, there is a whole machinery. There's a camera, there's a lens, there's a receptor, and you can improve the quality of those things. You can have in more expensive cameras a larger chip, and so you have higher resolution, higher quality of image, higher range of colors, etc. But after all that is done, there has to be a level where you have to take the image electrically, from the receptor. And the electrical image undergoes a process of enhancement and processing. After that processing has been done, there's one more layer where there's a recognition of the form itself, which is the mental, and a value given to form. This is fruit, this is bird, this is branch. In the way, the extent to which artificial intelligence has currently developed, you can go on Google Images, upload any picture. There are several websites which do this now. You can upload any picture, and it will tell you what is in the picture. So if you upload, for example, a windmill, photo of a windmill, it will tell you 80% probability windmill, 40% probability building. Now it has eliminated the wings of the windmill. 20% probability of a hill. Something like that. This is the part which is the mental value system. In between, in the processing, was the electrical processing, in the neural networks, isolation of patterns, etc., which is the energy process, the energy image, the contactual image, and the nervous impression of form. But there's no recognition of the thing itself. There's only patterns which are being matched. And then the recognition which is turned into a word or a mental idea, windmill. I'm not looking anymore at the impression of the form. I'm looking at the idea of windmill. That here is a place where there is wind which is turning a mill, which is processing food or pumping water or generating electricity or whatever it is. The idea of it. So there is the physical eidolon of matter, the pranic image impression, nervous energy image, and then the image reproduced in the stuff of mind. Now the image reproduced in the stuff of mind is where I am isolating the picture of windmill from the background and the context. This form, I see this. I see a bird, not a pattern of dots of colors. I see a thing in itself with an idea of what the thing represents to me. If I were to see a strange form, which I've never seen before, let's say you're watching a science fiction movie and a creature comes which has 3 eyes, 2 heads, or whatever weird skin color. As the creature walks, you say, what is that? You're looking for a name to ascribe to it. And yet the thing itself as a creature, a living thing, is there, an impression. But now you're trying to build values around it. Is it an intelligent creature? Is it a conscious creature? Is it coming with an intention to harm or with friendship? Now this is where the mind rushes and quickly constructs an image, a mental image. Having seen that creature 2, 3, 4 times and all these details having been filled, when the creature next comes, you say, it is a, whatever name you have given to it, Chewbacca. Okay, this is from Star Wars, I think, Chewbacca. Oh, it's Chewbacca. Oh, this is a rose. No, it's not a rose. This is unique. You have never seen it in your whole life. Oh, it's a rose. I know, I have seen roses. You see, the mind value is something which is already inside it, which it is now sticking on top like a sticker. Safe, comfortable, nice smelling, etc. So that's the third layer, which he describes as image reproduced in the stuff of mind. So 3 things are happening simultaneous in sequence, but happening so fast that we're not able to distinguish between them. This elaborate process is concealed from us by the lightning-like rapidity with which it is managed. Rapidity in our impression of time. For in another notation of time by a creature differently constituted, each part of the operation might be distinctly sensible. Now, this is a fascinating idea. And we will pause here. We've already crossed our time, but we had to complete this because it completes the first step of the discussion. These 3 things are happening one after another inside us, which so fast we don't notice. They're 3 separate things. But, he says, in another notation of time by a creature differently constituted. What does that mean? If you observe tiny little birds on the tree, hummingbirds, for example, which are the fastest beating wings, they go zip, 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 like that. You barely see them move. You cannot see their wings moving. Their sense of time is proportionally faster. They're able to see tiny movements of insects in much greater detail, as if we would see it in slow motion. They're seeing the insect slowly move like this. They're able to anticipate and go whoop and catch. To us, that whole thing is happening too fast because our time sense is slower than theirs. They live faster, and therefore everything inside them, the heart beats faster, the brain thinks faster, the seeing is faster, and so on. Differently constituted. In that kind of rapidity of the consciousness registering the world, the universe, these three steps perhaps could be felt distinctly. Now it's possible, if it's possible in little creatures, animals, it's equally possible in full-sized human forms. Perhaps not in this biology of the human being as it is now, but perhaps on human-like creatures from other planets who have developed in a slightly different way, whose nervous system might be faster than ours, who might be able to register these three things on a different, as distinct stages. And if we take the trouble to concentrate our attention and, so to say, sift in the time experience the finer distinctions of time, we too might be able to just distinguish between these three layers. Now, already in some examples which we saw, we are distinguishing some things. The finger touches, there's already the nervous response of pulling back, and then the registration of heat. So something registered even before I consciously felt the heat. And if I can concentrate on that, I can actually pick out something which touches before I experience touch. In other words, the body contact itself has a registration different from the mind registration, and I'm able to sense that before the mind registers. And it's possible for human beings to a certain degree. And so this is a fascinating possibility. A creature differently constituted in a different notation of time. Each part of the operation might be distinctly sensible. But always, he says, the triple translation is always there because there are really three sheaths of consciousness in us. The physical, vital and mental, through which this passes. So this we will take up next time. And then he will discuss how exactly mind registers the sense, when it becomes sense, and at what stage in this operation we call it sense. And then he turns to the processes happening within the mind itself. And there we discover secret processes. Just as here we are not conscious of these three layers and their separate processing. Within the mind itself we are not conscious of what happens there, which he will bring to our awareness. And we will actually feel that yes, our mind actually is able to do these things, though we are not fully aware of it. And the discussion then prepares us to understanding what is sense of our sense. What is it that truly senses, registers sensation, and is the essential power of sense within this elaborate machinery of sense experience. So we continue this next Sunday. We can briefly meditate on this whole discussion.